Wyoming Territory, June 1882, the day the storm broke over the Bighorn Mountains. Viktor Rowen found two children alone in a wagon off the trail, their lips dry and arms wrapped tight around each other in the back of a half-covered cart. The thunder rolled behind him as he pulled his horse to a stop, boots hitting the dirt with a hard thud just before the rain came down. A folded note was pinned to the boy's coat, the ink smeared but legible enough. "Please, someone take them. Their mother is gone. I cannot do this." He looked at them, one boy, maybe 6, and a little girl younger than that. Eyes wide, scared but quiet, brave like kids who had already seen too much. Viktor moved slow, kneeling beside the wagon. "My name's Viktor. I'm not gonna hurt you, all right?" The boy clutched the girl tighter, but he gave a small nod. "I'm Eli," he said, voice scratchy. Viktor's chest tightened. That was the start of everything. 3 days later, soaked to bone from riding through 2 storms, Viktor reined his horse to a stop at the outskirts of a small valley town called Willowbend. It was tucked up near the Bighorns, quiet and known for little more than a post office, a church, and a schoolhouse. He had been through once before, long enough to remember a bakery with good bread and a woman who had smiled at him from the mercantile steps. He had not expected to see her again. Not like this. He was leading the children on foot now, one in each hand, when he spotted her setting crates outside the schoolhouse. Her hair was darker than he remembered, pulled back in a loose braid that left strands curling around her face. She wore a slate blue dress with dust on the hem and something tired in her shoulders. "Zadie," he called before he could think better of it. She looked up and froze. "Viktor Rowen?" Her voice sounded the way it had when they were kids, half surprise, half testing if it could really be him. He stopped in front of her, the children still clinging to his hands. "It's been a while." 13 years, she said. Then her eyes dropped to the children. "Are they yours?" "No," he said quietly. "I found them. Abandoned. Just west of the canyon trail. Their mother's dead." Someone left a note. Zadie's gaze lingered on the boy and girl. She crouched down, not saying anything at first, just meeting Eli's eyes. "You hungry?" Eli glanced at Viktor, then gave a tiny nod. "Well," she said, standing. "Then you better come inside. I have leftover stew and some bread." Her house sat behind the school, a modest 2-room place with warm wood floors and a kettle that always seemed to be boiling. Zadie fed the children first, breaking the bread into small pieces and letting them eat slow, with no pressure to talk. Viktor watched her the whole time. She moved like someone used to making space for others, like someone who had lived through quiet kinds of loss. "How long have you had them?" she asked that night, once the children were asleep on a rolled-out mat by the fire. 3 days. "And you just took them?" "I could not leave them," he said. "Not out there. Not alone." Zadie nodded, eyes on the flames. "You always were like that." He shifted in the chair across from her. "Like what?" "Good," she said, glancing at him. "Even when we were kids, you were better than the rest." Viktor stared into the fire. "I left. You had to. Your father died. Your ma needed help." He looked at her then. "I never wrote." "No," she said softly. "You didn't." The silence stretched, but it was not cold. "Why are you still here?" he asked. Zadie looked down at her hands. "I left once. Went to Cheyenne. Married a man who drank more than he worked. Came back with a bruised cheek and a bag of books. This place is quiet. I like quiet now." Viktor clenched his jaw. "He hurt you." "Not anymore," she said, meeting his eyes. "He is gone." He did not push, just nodded, slow. The next day, Viktor found work mending fences for the local rancher who remembered him from years back. He moved into the barn behind it, kept the children close. Zadie visited often, bringing books for Eli and simple toys for little Emma, who had started to laugh again when the sun was out. 3 weeks passed like that. Then a month. One evening, after supper, Zadie stayed behind while the children played in the grass outside the barn. She handed Viktor a folded paper. "I asked the county clerk to look into them," she said. "There is no record of a father. No other family. If you wanted to, Keep them. It would not be hard. He opened the paper. Birth dates. Names. Emma and Eli. No last name listed. You think I should? He asked. I think you already have, she said. He looked up, and her eyes were soft. Zadie, he said, voice low. I do not know what I am doing. Well, she said, stepping closer. You are doing it anyway. He reached for her hand. She did not pull away. That summer, things changed. Zadie started staying longer. She brought supper more nights than not. She taught Eli how to read better, and she let Emma sit in her lap during afternoon lessons. Viktor found himself watching her more, how her lips moved when she read aloud, how she laughed when Emma tried to braid her hair. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, he walked her back to her house. They stood on the steps, the moon high overhead. Do you remember that tree near the river? He asked. Where we used to meet when we were 15? She smiled. You carved our initials in it. It is probably still there. You were quiet back then. Shy. I was in love with you. Zadie stopped breathing for a second. Then she said, I was in love with you too. He stepped down the last stair and touched her face. I still am. She leaned in, slow, and kissed him. It was not a rushed kiss. It was steady, full of things that had waited too long. When she pulled back, her forehead pressed to his. I do not want to be afraid anymore. You do not have to be, he said. Not with me. By autumn, the town began to talk, but neither of them cared. Viktor built a swing for the children outside Zadie's house. He started sleeping on her porch, then inside by the fire, then beside her. The children called her Mama without being asked. She cried the first time. One morning, as the leaves turned gold, Viktor knelt in the dirt behind the schoolhouse, a ring in his hand carved from birchwood. I cannot promise an easy life, he said, but I can promise I will never leave you again. Zadie's eyes filled. She took the ring and slid it on. You already gave me everything I wanted. He stood, and she kissed him hard, her hands in his hair, the children laughing behind them in the morning light. They were a family now, and they were in love. So in love. The wind had shifted by the time October settled into the valley. It blew colder now, pulling dry leaves from the cottonwoods and sweeping them across the fields in slow spirals. The mountains wore snow on their peaks, and the air smelled of wood smoke and turned to earth. Viktor had started stacking firewood along the side of Zadie's home, each log split by hand, the rhythm of it steadying. Some mornings he'd find her already outside, hauling kindling in her apron, cheeks pink from the chill. She'd glance over her shoulder and say nothing, just nod once like she knew he'd be there, and that was enough. One such morning, just after dawn, she paused by the split rail fence while the children played in the grass behind her. Emma was trying to balance on a tree stump, arms out like wings, and Eli crouched nearby, eyes sharp and cautious, always watching, always listening. You ever think about going somewhere else? She asked. Viktor drove the axe into a log and leaned on the handle, brow furrowed. Why? Zadie tilted her chin toward the hills. Because folks don't forget things in towns like this. You can carve a new life, and they'll still measure it against what they remember you by. Or what they think they know. He crossed the yard toward her, wiping his hands on his trousers. You want to leave? No, she said after a pause. But I wonder sometimes if staying means giving up the right to be something new. He looked past her toward the children. They're already something new. So are we. Her shoulders eased a little and she reached for his hand. I don't think I ever imagined a man like you'd be the one beside me now. I never imagined anything past 30, he said plainly. The war saw to that. Zadie's fingers tightened around his. You don't talk about it. There's not much to say, Viktor replied. It took more than it gave. You ever think on what it left behind instead? He shook his head. Only when I'm holding you. She didn't speak after that, just leaned into him until the wind settled and the sun rose high enough to warm the back porch. By late October, Viktor had taken on more work hauling timber for a ranch east of town. The days stretched long and the evenings darker, but he never missed supper. He'd come in with pine sap on his shirt and dust on his boots, and Zadie would pass him a tin basin of water and a rag before saying another word. One evening, she watched him from the doorway as he washed up, her arms folded under her apron. "Reverend Hartman came by the schoolhouse today," she said. Viktor glanced up. "What for?" "He wanted to know if we'd be setting a date." He dried his hands slow. "You tell him yes?" "I told him when we were ready he'd be the first to know." Viktor stepped onto the porch, the towel hanging from his shoulder. "You worried what folks will say?" "No," she said. "But I'm not looking to make a spectacle either. We don't have to." Zadie looked out toward the barn where the children had made a game of chasing chickens out of the feed. "I just want something that feels honest. Nothing fancy. Just real." Viktor studied her a moment, then nodded. "There's an old table up in the loft. I could fix it. Make something strong." "For what?" "For us to eat our first meal on. After." Zadie smiled without looking at him. "That sounds about right." The next morning, Zadie took the wagon into town to fetch more ink for the schoolroom and a bolt of muslin she'd ordered from Cheyenne. When she returned, her cheeks were windburned and her eyes unreadable. Viktor unhitched the team and didn't ask until she was seated at the kitchen table, the children busy with their slates in the corner. "Something happened?" She ran her thumb along the edge of the table. "Mrs. Fenton said I ought to be careful. That marrying a man with no people and 2 foundlings might not be wise." He stiffened, but she raised a hand. "I told her I'd rather be surrounded by love than by names on a family Bible, and that I'd take you and those children over any bloodline she could offer." Viktor crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "I don't need anybody's blessing but yours." "You already have it," she said, voice low. "But I wanted you to know what people are saying." "I don't care. I didn't think you did," she murmured, brushing her hand along his jaw. "But I thought you should hear it from me." He stayed there a moment longer before rising and heading back outside. The air felt sharper now, the kind that hinted at snow. Winter would come early this year. By November's first week, the schoolhouse had closed for the season. Zadie spent her mornings sewing by the stove, the windows fogged from the heat inside. Viktor kept his hands busy with repairs, tightening the hinges on the barn doors, patching a leak in the roof over their bedroom. One night, after the children were asleep, he sat beside her and ran his fingers along the edge of the muslin she'd been stitching. "You making something?" he asked. She didn't look up from her needle. "A dress. For church. For me. For when we stand in front of Reverend Hartman." He exhaled slow. "You want me to wear anything special?" She finally looked up. "Just yourself." He leaned back in the chair. "That I can do." The night before the wedding, a stillness settled over the house. Zadie braided Emma's hair by lamplight while Eli sat close to Viktor, carving a small horse out of leftover pine. No one said much. The quiet was full, not empty. When the children were in bed, Zadie stood at the window, her arms folded, the moonlight silvering her face. "You nervous?" Viktor asked from behind her. She didn't turn. "No, just remembering." He stepped closer, his presence steady. "What are you remembering?" "My mother's hands when she sewed. The way she'd hum when she was almost done. It made me feel safe. Like nothing could go wrong." He let the silence stretch before speaking. "I want that for them. For you." She turned then, slowly, and looked at him. "You already gave it to me. I'm just learning to trust it's real." He reached up and cupped her cheek. "It's real." The wedding was held beneath the cottonwood near the old schoolhouse, the same one where Zadie used to read stories under the branches. Reverend Hartman read from his small leather book, and the few neighbors who came stood back, respectful. Zadie wore the muslin dress she'd stitched by hand, simple and clean. Viktor wore his best shirt, sleeves rolled at the cuffs. Eli held Emma's hand, both solemn as they watched. When the vows were spoken, there was no fanfare. Just steady voices, a clasped hand, and the kind of kiss that made the wind pause in the trees. Afterward, they ate bread and roasted squash at the old table Viktor had restored, its top planed smooth, the legs even. Zadie laid a cloth over it, stitched with wildflowers. That night, the house was quiet again, but now it was full in a different way. Zadie lay beside Viktor in the narrow bed, her back pressed to his chest, his arm around her waist. You warm enough? He asked, voice low against her hair. I am now, she whispered. He pulled her closer. Outside, the wind rustled the dry branches, but it couldn't get in. Not here. Not anymore. The winter settled in firm by the first week of December. Snow came early, light at first, then thick and heavy, curling along the eaves of the house and blanketing the hills in silence. The world narrowed paths between barn and home, the stretch of pasture reduced to what could be shoveled or tramped down by boot. It was a season of staying close, of keeping warm, of learning the shape of one another's quiet. Viktor rose before first light now, lighting the fire and tending the stove before the others stirred. He'd grown used to the sound of Zadie's breath behind him, the soft weight of her presence in the blankets they shared. She always kept her back to him at first, one leg tangled in the quilt, and he'd let her sleep while the coffee boiled. Zadie no longer startled at the creak of the floorboards or the snap of cold wind against the windows. She moved slowly in the mornings, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and pressing her hand to the crown of Emma's head as she passed. They shared fewer words these days, not from distance, but from a comfort that no longer needed filling. One evening, when the snow had piled high enough to bury the fence posts halfway, Zadie stood by the pantry, surveying the shelves with a frown. We're running low on salt pork and flour. I thought we had more. Viktor pulled on his coat from the peg near the door. I'll make the trip to town tomorrow. If there's anything else, write it out. She paused, the slate in her hand. You shouldn't go alone. The trail's deep, and I doubt it'll be plowed. I'll take the sled. The big mare can pull steady. Her eyes lingered on him longer than usual. Just make sure you come back before dusk. I always do. Zadie didn't answer, but when he turned to leave, she slipped something into his coat pocket, her gloves, mended at the thumb, still warm from her hands. The trip to Willowbend took twice as long as it had in the fall. Viktor guided the mare with a steady hand, the sled creaking behind him, breath steaming in the still air. He reached the mercantile by midday, the sun already low on the horizon. Inside, the room smelled of oilcloth and dried apples, the stove burning low in the corner. Martha Rigg, who ran the place since her husband passed, greeted him with a nod. Didn't expect to see anyone up from the ridge today. Snow's no worse than the year we lost the north pasture, Viktor said, brushing ice from his collar. Still, most folks are keeping close to home. You need a sack of flour. And salt pork. Dried beans if you've got them. She began measuring out the goods in silence. When she handed him the parcel, her gaze lingered. Heard you and the schoolteacher finally made it official. We did, he said, folding the sack closed. Martha pursed her lips, then softened. She's a good one. Took in a girl from the orphan train 2 winters back before she married off. Quiet as a shadow, that child. Zadie had her reading by spring. Viktor hadn't heard that before. He nodded once, packed the sled, and began the slow ride back. He arrived just before dusk, the wind cutting sharper now. Zadie met him at the door with a lantern in hand, her eyes wet from the cold. You're late, she said, voice low. Barely, he replied, brushing snow from his sleeves. Didn't mean to worry you. She stepped aside so he could enter. I wasn't worried. But when he leaned down to kiss her cheek, she let her hand rest on his back longer than usual. That night, after the children were asleep, Viktor sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling a small bird from a piece of hickory. Zadie sat by the fire, mending a tear in Eli's boot. He watched her a moment, then said, Martha told me about the girl you took in. Zadie didn't look up. Her name was Tilly. She was 8. Barely spoke above a whisper. What happened to her? She went to a family west of Sheridan. A couple with no children of their own. She paused, her needle stilled. She wrote me once. Said she had a dog now and a brother who taught her to fish. Viktor set down his knife. You never told me. It didn't feel like something that needed saying. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You've carried a lot alone. Zadie met his gaze. So have you. They let the fire pop and crackle between them. Then she said, I used to dream about a place that didn't feel temporary. Where I wasn't waiting for someone to leave. You think this is that place? I do now. The next morning brought a clear sky and hard frost. Viktor hitched the mare again and rode out to check the fencing in the lower pasture. He'd left Eli with instructions to haul wood for the stove and keep Emma close indoors. Zadie taught them letters at the table, her voice low and patient. By midday, she found herself alone in the kitchen, a pot of beans simmering on the stove. The quiet unnerved her suddenly. She stepped outside to shake the rug and caught sight of a figure coming up the path, thin, hunched beneath a tattered coat, with a limp that dragged his right leg behind him. Zadie let the rug fall and moved to the porch. The man stopped a few feet away. His face was drawn, eyes sunken, one hand pressed to his side beneath the coat. "Ma'am," he rasped. "I saw smoke. Thought maybe." She didn't let him finish. "You need food." He nodded, swaying slightly. "Come in slow. Keep your hands where I can see them." She moved aside, heart pounding, her eyes flicking toward the barn. Viktor wouldn't be home for another hour, maybe more. Inside, she gave the man a chair near the stove and a half loaf of bread. He devoured it in silence, crumbs catching in his beard. After a moment, he looked up. "You the schoolteacher?" "I am. Folks said you married the quiet fella with the scar down his cheek." Zadie's jaw tightened. "What's your name?" "Thompson," he said. "Used to run freight through the pass. Got caught in a slide last week. Lost the mule. Been walking 3 days." She didn't trust the story, not entirely, but the wear in his boots and the pale crust on his lips told her he wasn't lying about the hunger. When Viktor returned, he entered the house to find Zadie standing behind the man, her hand near the drawer that held the kitchen knife. Viktor's eyes flicked to the stranger. "He trouble?" "No," she said. "Just cold and hungry." Viktor nodded once. "Then he can eat and sleep in the barn." Thompson left the next morning with a ration of bread and beans wrapped in cloth. He didn't look back. That evening, Zadie stood beside Viktor at the stove, stirring the pot while he peeled potatoes. "I didn't like how he knew who we were." "Neither did I," he said. "But I don't think he was looking for anything more. He was watching the children. I noticed." She leaned her hip against the counter. "You think he'll come back?" "If he does, he'll find me waiting." She touched his arm. "You always say things like that. Like you're ready for the worst." "I lived too long expecting it." "Do you still?" "Not since you." The days shortened still. Snow built higher along the eaves. Inside, the house remained warm, lamplight pooling on the table, boots drying by the stove, Zadie's laughter low and rare but real when Emma said something clever. Viktor barely left the ridge anymore. There was no need. One afternoon, Zadie sat by the window, patching the knees of Eli's trousers. She looked up as Viktor came inside, his coat dusted in snow. "I was thinking," she said, folding the cloth in her lap, "about spring. What about it? I want to plant a garden. Not just herbs. Beans, squash, maybe tomatoes if we can keep the frost off." He hung his coat and crossed to her. "You want help. I want you to dig the beds with me and build a gate so the deer keep out." "I can do that," she smiled. "And I want to teach Emma how to shell peas and let Eli have his own row to tend." He knelt beside her chair, resting his hand on her knee. "You're planning a long time ahead. I finally can." He leaned up and kissed her, slow and sure. "Then we'll plant it all." Outside the window, snow kept falling, but beneath it, the ground held steady, waiting to bloom. By mid-January, the mountains disappeared most days behind a veil of snow. The wind came down from the north in long, low howls that bent the trees and rattled the iron latch on the barn door. Inside the house, the cold pressed against the windows but didn't find its way in. The walls held. The fire held. And so did they. Viktor had begun rising later. The chores were fewer now, the animals content to stay huddled in the barn, and there was no field to tend until the earth thawed. He spent more time inside, whittling small figures for the children or helping Zadie wash linens by hand when the water wasn't frozen solid in the pump. One afternoon, as he rubbed wax into the hinges on the cupboard door, Zadie reached for a wrapped bundle near the hearth. "I'd meant to give you this before Christmas," she said, unwrapping the cloth. "But you've been working near every daylight hour since." She handed him a small book, the kind sewn by hand, the edges uneven and the cover pressed from thick canvas. Inside, the pages were blank. I tore the paper from an old ledger, she said. Figured you might want a place to write down things that matter. Viktor turned the book in his hands. I don't write much. You don't have to, she said, brushing a thread from her sleeve. But if something ever happened to you, I'd want the children to know who you were. How you thought. What you carried. He closed the book gently. I'd rather they knew me by how I lived. Zadie didn't argue. She just folded the cloth again and set it aside. That night, long after the house had gone quiet and the coals had turned to ember, Viktor sat at the table alone, the little book open before him. He stared at the first page for a long while before writing one word, home. The next day brought a break in the weather. The sun rose pale and uncertain, but it stayed above the ridge until nearly evening. Zadie sent Emma out with a pair of mittens tied to her wrists and a basket to gather kindling. Viktor followed Eli to the edge of the pasture, showing him how to mark the fence posts with charcoal so they'd be easier to find under snow. As they walked, Eli kept glancing over his shoulder. You expecting something? Viktor asked. The boy shook his head, but his thumb moved to his mouth before he caught himself. I just don't like when it's too quiet. Why's that? Feels like something's waiting. Viktor crouched beside him. Nothing's waiting out here but spring. Eli didn't answer, but he stayed close the whole way back. That evening, Zadie took her time brushing the tangles from Emma's hair. The girl sat on a low stool near the fire, head tilted back, while Zadie worked with careful hands and a bone comb. She said she wants to grow it to her waist, Zadie said, glancing at Viktor. Told me long hair makes girls look brave. He folded a length of twine for kindling. Where'd she get that idea? She couldn't say. Just that brave girls have long hair and brave boys don't cry. Viktor looked at Eli, who sat with a book in his lap, pretending not to listen. Bravery's got nothing to do with hair or tears, Viktor said. It's what you do when no one's watching. Zadie kept combing. That sounds like something you should write in that book. He nodded but didn't move to fetch it. 3 days later, the first letter arrived. Zadie found it wedged under the door, the outside crusted with frost, the ink brittle and faint. No stamp, no return. Just a name in a hand she didn't know. To the woman calling herself Mrs. Rowen. She read it in silence by the stove while Viktor unloaded firewood. When he came in, stomping snow from his boots, he paused at the look on her face. You don't have Ken out this way, he said, setting down the sack. No, she said, folding the letter once more. But someone's watching who thinks I don't belong here. He took the paper from her hand. Read it once slow. When he looked up, his jaw was tight. You think it's that man who passed through? The one who asked too much. Could be. Or someone who knows him. You want me to go into town? Ask around. No, she said, her voice firm. That's what they want. To unsettle us. Then we wait. We live, she corrected. Same as before. But that evening, she double-latched the back door. A week passed without another word. The snow thickened again, and the paths grew narrow. Viktor and Eli built a sled track down the hill behind the barn, and for a while, laughter returned to the ridge. Then, one morning, a second letter appeared. This time, tucked between the slats of the porch rail. The message was shorter. You don't belong. You never will. Zadie burned it in the stove before Viktor could read it. This isn't about me, she said, watching the paper curl black. It's about what I've built here. What we've built. He didn't argue, just reached for her hand and held it longer than usual. Later that day, he rode into Willowbend with Eli. He didn't say why. When he returned, he brought back more than provisions. He brought news. I talked to Martha Rigg, he said that night, after the children had gone to bed. She said a man came through asking if a woman lived out here with a girl and boy not her own. Said he was looking for a relative. Zadie's face went still. Did he say his name? No, she stood, walking to the window, though there was nothing to see but dark. Whoever it is, Viktor said, rising too. They're not getting close without going through me. I'm not afraid for myself, she said. But if they try to take the children, they won't. How can you know? Because this is their home. And because I won't leave again. She turned, her eyes wet. You mean that? I meant it the day I gave you that ring. The tension didn't lift after that, but it settled into something they could carry. They kept the children close. They watched the tree line more carefully. Zadie stopped taking the path behind the ridge alone. Still, life pressed on. Viktor built a new shelf for the pantry and Zadie painted it a dull red. Eli began drawing pictures on scraps of paper, crude shapes that slowly took form: barns, horses, a woman with her hair in a braid. Emma learned to hum, a tune she said came from nowhere, and it filled the house with a sound like threads being tied. One morning near the end of February, a third letter came. This time it was inside the barn. Viktor found it nailed to the post near the tack room. The nail bent and rusted. The message was longer now, and this time it named the children. Zadie read it once before folding it and tucking it into the stove. She didn't speak again until the fire took it whole. They weren't left by accident, she said. Viktor frowned. What do you mean? I think someone meant for you to find them. He stared at her, the words turning like stones in his chest. Why? I don't know. But I think whoever left them is still watching. That night, Viktor sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed. He opened the little book Zadie had given him and wrote a single line. If I have to stand between them and the world, I will. Spring was still a long way off. But they didn't wait for it to bloom. They lived in the meantime. They endured. And between each breath, they held to what they had made together. Not perfect, not without fear, but solid as the house they shared. The letter stopped the snow. Or maybe it just seemed that way. By the time March came, the ridge thawed in patches, the soil below the porch steps softening into mud, the edges of the river breaking loose in slow, cold trickles. The last message had come and gone, burned before it could sit long enough to chill the room. But it left a weight behind, one that settled into Viktor's shoulders and didn't lift with the weather. He dug trenches around the barn when the melt began, shoulders straining against the shovel, boots sinking deep into the earth. He didn't ask Zadie if she'd slept. He knew she hadn't. Her eyes were sharp now, her movements spare like someone waiting for a blow that hadn't fallen yet. That afternoon, she stood near the fence line, watching Eli and Emma stack kindling. The wind stirred her skirts around her boots and her braid had come half undone. Viktor approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. I've been thinking, she said before he reached her. He stopped beside her, arms folded. If someone wanted to take them, they would have done it already. Whoever they are, they're not after the children. Not really. He watched her profile. Then what are they after? She turned toward him. Me. Or maybe us. The life we made. He didn't answer. She wasn't asking him to. Later, while the children napped, Zadie sat at the kitchen table with the marriage record open in front of her. The paper had wrinkled some from the damp, but the ink still held strong. She traced her name with one finger. I want to file for adoption, she said. Viktor looked up from the wall where he was measuring for new shelves. They're already yours. Not by law. She met his eyes. If something happened to you, I'd have no say. He set the measuring stick down. I'll ride into Buffalo next week. We'll file together. She nodded. I want their names to stay the same. But I want them to be mine too. They are. No, she said gently. They're ours. But I want them to know they were chosen. Not just found. That night, after the lanterns were out, Viktor lay awake with his arm beneath her shoulders, her head tucked into the hollow of his chest. He could feel the worry in her breath, the way she hadn't quite let it go. I've killed men, he said into the dark. Zadie didn't move. In the war. After two. Mostly to protect someone. Sometimes just to live. She shifted enough to look up at him in the faint light. Why are you telling me this now? Because if someone comes for them, I'll do it again. Her fingers brushed his jaw. I don't want that for you. I don't want it either. But I won't hesitate. She pressed her mouth to his shoulder. Then we'll pray they never come. They didn't. A full month passed without another letter. The thaw gave way to green, slow at first, but steady. Viktor rebuilt the coop and repaired the broken gate on the west side. Zadie planted radish seeds along the south wall and marked out space for beans. Emma made a game of counting the sprouts, her knees always dirty, her laughter louder than it had been since the autumn. Eli grew quieter as the days got longer, not fearful but inward, like he was sorting through something he couldn't quite name. One afternoon, Viktor found him behind the shed, carving lines into the bark of a fallen log with the point of a nail. "Drawing something?" Viktor asked, crouching beside him. "Counting," Eli said. "Every day since we came." Viktor looked at the lines. "That's a lot of days." 127, Eli said. "Tomorrow makes 128. Why are you keeping track?" Eli stared at the wood. "Because I want to ask if I can stay." Viktor felt his throat tighten. "You don't have to ask. You already are." Eli turned toward him. "Even if I mess up sometimes?" "Especially then." The boy nodded and went back to the log, carving one more line with slow, careful pressure. That evening, Zadie brought out a bundle of cloth wrapped tight with twine. She laid it on the table and unwrapped it without a word. Inside were 2 books, one with a red cover, one blue, and 2 small carved stamps, one shaped like a tree, the other a star. "I saved for these," she said. "Thought they might be ready." Eli took the red book, Emma the blue. Inside, the pages were ruled for writing, their names already penned neatly on the inside covers alongside her own and Viktor's. Emma squealed and hugged hers tight. Eli looked at his for a long time before whispering something neither of them caught. "What was that?" Zadie asked gently. He cleared his throat. "I said thank you." She leaned over and kissed the top of his head. The day they rode into Buffalo, the sky was pale and clear. Viktor hitched the wagon early, packed bread and dried meat, and helped Emma into her coat while Zadie braided her hair tight. They reached the courthouse just after midday. The clerk behind the desk was older, with a frayed collar and eyes that didn't miss much. "You're here to file for guardianship?" he asked. Zadie stepped forward. "For adoption. Of both children. Any blood relation?" "No," she said. "But we're their family." The man looked over the papers Viktor slid across the counter. He nodded slowly, then gestured toward the bench. "It'll take a few hours to process. You're welcome to wait." They sat together, the children between them. Zadie read from a small book she brought, her voice low and steady. Viktor kept watch on the door, his hand resting lightly on Emma's knee. When the clerk returned, he handed them a stamped form. "It's done," he said. "They're yours in every way that counts." Zadie held the paper with both hands. Viktor watched her eyes soften, the edges of her mouth lift in a way that hadn't happened since winter. Outside, she knelt in the street and held both children close. "You're ours," she said. "Forever." They returned to the ridge in light snow, the last of the season. It melted before it touched the ground. In the weeks that followed, the house changed in small ways. Viktor built a bench for the porch where Zadie could shell peas. Eli started a journal in his red book, writing 1 sentence each night. Emma planted marigold seeds in a tin cup and waited for them to bloom. One morning, Zadie found Viktor in the barn, oiling the hinges on the stall doors. She stood in the doorway watching him, arms folded. "I want to build a second room," she said. "For the children. They're getting older." He wiped his hands on a rag. "I'll start this week." She looked at him a long time. "You didn't ask why." "Didn't need to." She stepped forward, took his hand. "I want them to grow with space. I want this place to hold them, even when they're grown. It will. And I want to grow old with you in that bed by the stove." He kissed her then, slow and full, the kind that stayed with them both long after. Spring passed into summer. The garden came in strong. Zadie taught Emma how to tell when beans were ready to pick. Viktor showed Eli how to set a snare. They lived simple but full. No more letters came. One night, as the stars bled into the sky above the ridge, Zadie sat on the porch with Viktor, their hands laced together. "I used to think peace was something that happened to other people," she said. "And now I know it's something you build. One day at a time." He looked out at the darkening field. "We built it." She leaned into him, her voice no louder than the wind. "And we're keeping it. Inside, the children slept in their new room, the soft sounds of their breathing threading through the walls like a hymn. The house stood quiet and whole. And they were in love, deep, enduring love, the kind that didn't need proving anymore. It just was. Like the land beneath their feet. Like the sky above the ridge. Like the years ahead waiting to be lived.